Lisa. Welcome back. So we're doing some more urinary system. So this time we're continuing with the concept of urine formation, and this time we're going to start looking at the glomerular filtration rate, or the GFR. So we've talked a little bit about filtration. So it does, the filtration pressure depends on a lot of things. So water or osmotic pressure, so salt balances, sugar balances on either side of the filtration membrane, right? So blood hydrostatic pressure, BHP, is relatively high in these glomerular capillaries because what we want to do is we want these capillaries to kind of push out the filtrate, right? So that's kind of why we have a little bit of higher pressure just on a normal day, right? With nothing too strenuous going on. So hydrostatic pressure in the capsular space is going to be 18 millimeters per mercury due to this high filtration rate and the continual accumulation of fluid in the capsule, meaning like water is pulling water through. Okay, there it is. Okay. So the colloid osmotic pressure, or the COP of blood, it's pretty much the same as is everywhere else. So it's 32 millimeters per mercury. The glomerular filtrate is almost protein free. Obviously, like those are large particles, they're not going to get through that first three membrane layer stage in the glomerulus. And so it doesn't really change the COP. The higher outward pressure is like kind of a lot. It's almost double. And so it's 60 millimeters per mercury, opposed to the inward pressures, which are much lower, of only 18 or 32 millimeters per mercury. So you have directional flow from outward to in. The net filtration pressure means basically that we take the overall outward bound pressure and we subtract the two inward bound pressure. And so we get a pressure difference of about 10 millimeters per mercury, and it's in the outwardly direction because that was still the greatest value. High blood pressure in the glomerulus can make the kidneys vulnerable to hypertension, meaning that it kind of pushes, because it's already a little bit higher pressure because we're trying to push out the filtrate. And then if we have higher pressure on top of that, what can happen is we actually burst the glomerulus up a little bit in multiple ways. Number one, we're going to be pushing and expanding, um, making basically a hypertrophic state of the glomerulus itself, like the corpuscle, the renal corpuscle. In addition to that, we also can overstrain the arterioles that are going to be passing through all of the little podocytes and kind of making those fenestrations significantly larger, right? They can even rupture some of these blood vessels as well. So we have scarring that could occur in the kidneys, and we can also have blood vessels that can burst as well. And if we do have this, we're going to lead to renal failure, and kidneys aren't super great at regenerating themselves because they have so many specialized, specific structures. So here we go again, the forces. So we have forces are going to be the BHP 60 out, COP 32 in, CP 18 in, and that gives us an overall net filtration pressure of 10 out. Right, so that was just a nice little rendering. So here it is, the GFR, which is the glomerular filtration rate. And so that is the amount of filtrate that is formed per minute, or squeezed out per minute, by each of the two kidneys combined all together. Generally, it's on the order of between 150 and 180 liters per day for males or females. So it's actually like kind of a lot. That means there's also a lot of resorption there as well. Um, so some key terms: net filtration pressure, NFP, and the filtration coefficient is KF. Um, so the filtration coefficient, just so you kind of like know what it is it depends on how easily this filtrate is going to be able to pass from the arterioles, the afferent arterioles, into the renal corpuscle, and then eventually through the proximal convoluted tubule and all that good stuff. The total amount of the filtrate produced per day equals 50 to 60 times the amount of blood supply in the entire body. And that means that we have a really high rate of reabsorption, since we really only produce between 1 and 2 liters of urine excreted per day if you're drinking a relatively normal amount of water. If you're not having that much excretion of urine, re up the water, right? Because so much of it is actually reabsorbed and right. So if the glomerular filtration rate is too high, or fluid is going to be flowing through the renal tubules too fast, what's happening is they're not actually able to do proper resorption of all of the water or all of the sugars and salts and all that other solutes that are in there. It also means that urine output is going to rise. So, over frequently urination because we're not actually going through the reabsorption process very well. So, dehydration is super quick. Um, especially because it takes also the electrolytes as well as the water out as well. If the glomerular filtration rate is too low, what ends up happening is waste just like kind of hangs out in the bloodstream. It doesn't get filtered out. It can also lead to too high levels of water or somewhat edema, and azotemia may also start occurring. So the glomerular filtration rate is controlled by adjusting the pressure of blood that's going into the corpuscle moment by moment. And so the glomerular filtration rate control is kind of regulated by three things. Number one, the kidneys can kind of self-regulate to some degree. We do know there is a sympathetic control mechanism as well, but we also know that different hormones can affect that glomerular filtration rate, specifically ones that are going to be controlling things like how much water is in the body, right? And like water loss through urination. So when we talk about renal autoregulation, the kidneys are kind of able to regulate themselves in a way. So what this means is that we're looking at the ability of the nephrons to adjust their own supply, um, and the GFR, glomerular filtration rate, without any kind of nervous or hormonal control. So this is like a really tight biofeedback, right? The biofeedback loop. And so it is kind of important that it's maintained at this super small detail because these are also very fine structures, very teeny tiny ones. And so there are two kinds of ways that this autoregulation can happen. One is muscle-based, so it is a myogenic mechanism, and the other one is a tubuloglomerular feedback system, which allows them to kind of like interchange and communicate and autoregulate in that way. Okay. So in terms of the muscle one or the myogenic one, so this is going to be referring to specifically the smooth muscle. And so it's based on a stretch reflex as well. So if we feel that the arterial blood pressure is increasing and we have that stretch reflex that's sensed in the afferent arterial or the input arterial, what ends up happening is we can do a constriction as a response, and that's going to kind of like prevent so much blood from flowing into the glomerulus, and it reduces the pressure in that way. However, if the arterial blood pressure fails, the afferent arterial is going to do everything it can to fill up um, the filtrate in that glomerulus, and so it's actually going to open up, dilate, and relax, and kind of get as much as it can get in. The afferent arterial dilates and it allows, of course, all that blood flow to move more easily into the glomerulus, filling it up. And hopefully the body thinks, oh, let's just hope this is temporary, right? Tubular glomerular feedback is different. So this is when we talked about this. We are regulating from the tube itself. And so it's going to be regulating the filtrate composition, um, based on blood pressure as well. So this is primarily pressure related, but it also has some elements that are going to be related to um, the electrolytes. Electrolytes. That's spelled perfect. Um, so the glomerular apparatus, so this is for the glomerular, sorry, nephrons, are found at the end of that nephron loop, and that is where it has entered the renal cortex itself. So the loop comes in contact with the efferent and the afferent arterioles, and that's going to be able to create a pressure sensation environment itself. And let's see here. To the glomerular feedback continued. Great. Okay, so the macula densa is this tiny little bit of slender sensory cells at the back of the nephron loop, kind of like the macula densa in the back of the eye, right? So we have like this little dense area of sensory cells. And so when it's sensing again pressure, right? So GFR, glomerular filtration rate is high. We're going to have a lot more fluid, and along with it, it's going to be a lot more salt. And so what happens is when that salt hits the macula densa, it's going to absorb more of it because that's its uptake, and it's going to in turn secrete ATP. So the ATP is going to be converted into adenosine, and then adenosine is going to be the signal molecule that's going to stimulate nearby granular cells. And so the granular cells, the juxtacellular cells, are modified smooth muscle cells. And so these smooth muscle cells are actually wrapped around the arterioles. And so if they can wrap around and they expand or contract, that's how they're going to control that blood flow rate itself. Right. So hopefully that's super understandable. Okay, good. The granular cells are also containing little bits of renin, which is why they got their name. They look like they actually are carrying these granules. And so renin is going to be secreted in response to blood pressure. So renin is going to activate angiotensin aldosterone system, which works to control the blood volume and pressure, especially by causing contractions, thusly kind of raising blood pressure a bit. So renal autoregulation is regulating the GFR, but it can't keep it entirely constant. That means it's kind of ephemeral. It's happening quickly. It's happening in a direct response, because nothing is ever really totally perfectly constant, right? Anywhere, and especially in the body. There's always kind of like this undulation, this feedback system that kind of like goes back and forth and plays in that way. Right. So if the arterial pressure is going to drop significantly, say it drops below 70 millimeters per mercury, what happens is the body kind of freaks and it wants to stop and not get into hypovolemic shock, and so it's going to just stop the urine filtration or urine output altogether. Okay. However, if the glomerular filtration rate is going to rise, and more salt is going to be reabsorbed and more adenosine is going to be pushed out, um, it's going to stimulate these cells to contract, right? And it's going to constrict the afferent arteriole, meaning that's going to kind of like drop that pressure down because less filtrate is going to be able to kind of go through those arterioles in the first place, and then that's how we get us back to normal. So if the glomerular filtration rate falls, again, the macula, that sensory patch at the bottom of the nephron loop, is going to relax the efferent arteries and the mesangial cells, and it's going to allow for an increase in blood flow, and then that's going to kind of kick that GFR, the glomerular filtration rate, back up to where we want it to be. Oops. Okay, so I hope that was kind of helpful. I know it was just like a little bit of a description of what happens. I just kind of want you to be in the ballpark of understanding that there's a handful of mechanisms and it's all really pressure-based interplay. And there are a few signal molecules like salt, for example, a handful of things. And I hope that was helpful. I hope you all are out there having a great day. Bye-bye.